Okay, well, I want to talk a little bit about lava deltas, in part because New Year's Eve we had a really exciting event down there at the coastline. These lava deltas are a phenomenon that HVO scientists and others have observed repeatedly during the course of this 34-year East Rift Zone eruption. And again, this is where lava reaches the ocean, goes over the sea cliff, and basically builds out a bench, or a better word for that is a delta of new land moving into the sea. Now, the topography of the submarine environment here off the south coast of Kilauea is very steep. There's not a long, gentle shelf. It goes down very deep, very steeply. And so, as you can imagine, as material hits the ocean, much of it fragments and breaks apart during that rather violent interaction of cold water and hot lava. And so mixed in with the new lava extending out here is a very rubble-rich material that forms the base of a more solid lava flow that extends out. So in your mind's eye, what you'll see is a shelf of rather solid-looking lava, but it's built on a base of rubble. Unstable rubble that you can imagine doesn't hold up well as water underwater is interacting and mixing with that. That rubble layer beneath this shelf can actually get eroded away by the wave action, and then the shelf basically collapses into the sea. And those collapses happen very suddenly, and of course if you're standing anywhere on this, you're likely to lose your life. And if you're standing very near it, as these people were in late August, these collapses can also produce explosions of debris that fly high into the sky, send rocks the size of washing machines up onto the land. So the other thing that can happen is during these collapses there can be waves propagating through the ocean offshore, and it's probably not a great idea to be so close in a little boat. In an attempt to convey this concern about being close to the actively growing bench, HVO produced a map showing a dotted line that gives about a 300-meter or about 3 football field buffer around the active lava entry. And we felt, based on past experience with these collapses, that was a pretty good safety margin. So we talked a lot with the National Park Service, because this was all within the park, and they eventually set up a rope line approximately following this area here to keep people at what we felt was a reasonably safe distance away. So the other hazard related to these ocean entries that I want to remind people about is that in addition to the collapsing delta, that mixture of superheated steam and debris that's being formed at that interaction is pretty toxic and not good to breathe. So this cloud that you see emanating from the ocean entry consists of superheated steam, hydrochloric acid, which of course doesn't feel very good in your eyes, and really tiny shards of volcanic glass. So this is not good stuff to breathe and not good stuff to get in your eye. That's one reason that we recommend, if people are going to walk in to see the ocean entry on a trade wind day, they come in from the Kalapana side. It's a little closer, but it's also upwind of this plume. But let's go back to the delta collapse story. This was an aerial photo taken in late November of the eastern entry, which was the largest of the two. At this point, it was about 25 acres in size, or about 25 football fields in area. And notice these prominent cracks running parallel to the shoreline. We saw these, I can't remember when we first saw them, but they were, of course, a telltale sign that the delta was unstable, and that at any time these cracks could become failure surfaces for large chunks to be sliding away. So Park Service was aware of this, and that was another reason to keep people at a safe distance. And here's a couple of cartoons that help describe, hopefully a little better than I did with words, actually how these bench collapses work. So in this cartoon, we've got lava flowing over the sea cliff, creating a steep apron of debris underwater. Some of this is solid lava, some of it is this rubble that forms where the lava breaks apart when it meets the cold water. And you eventually get this sort of prograding, shelved layers of rubble and solid lava that can eventually be capped by fairly solid-looking lava flows that are subhorizontal. But as we saw in that last picture, these cracks can propagate quite deeply down under the ocean line. And then, without warning, some of these cracks can become active, and large chunks can just peel away, exposing lava tubes and hot rock suddenly to the cold water, which creates these steam explosions, sending blocks in all directions. Superheated steam and scalding water that can splash up onto the seacoast. In the 34 years of activity at Pu'u'o, there have been, I think, at least 4 deaths from this process. So it is a serious phenomenon. And then after a collapse event, the danger has not passed because now you'll get new lava prograding out over the collapse feature, and basically the cycle begins anew. So, wisely, the rope line was put in place and people were mostly kept at a safe distance. You still, with a good pair of binoculars or even with the naked eye, could see a lot of excitement and great lava dribbling into the sea. So in the afternoon of New Year's Eve, the Park Service staff were down at the coast helping visitors out, started noticing the beginning of collapses in the early afternoon. And this is footage just showing what that looks like as pieces of the bench are peeling away into the ocean, liberating these clouds of debris. You see the black fine material, that's volcanic glass and ash and small bits, and then a much more robust plume of that, what we call laze. And here it is in the dusk hours showing the incandescence from the actual fragments of molten spatter being thrown up during these explosions. So it was pretty dramatic visually. And I'm sure there's some other video out there on the internet that we haven't had time yet to capture. But the thing about this event, which is very sobering, is that it began in the early afternoon. It occurred over a couple of hours into the evening. Most of that 26 acres or 25 football fields fell into the sea. And then later in the evening, later in the afternoon and evening, additional land adjacent to the delta, part of the old sea cliff, started sliding into the sea as well. There was, in terms of the map, a very small chunk of the public viewing area that was outside the rope line also fell away. Video taken the next day by one of the HVO geologists who went down to see things, and it's showing essentially the decapitated lava tube that was feeding the lava distribution on the delta, beheaded by the collapse and kind of streaming into the ocean in a single stream. I don't know, this may be a couple of meters, a couple of yards wide here, but creating a very violent interaction at the ocean. And what you can see here is that well, I'll show you in a minute, but most of the lava delta is gone. Okay, here's another photo from New Year's Eve during the collapse period taken by a Park Service ranger. Again, showing these clouds of volcanic ash-laden debris rising up above the explosions, the repeated explosions occurring here. And you can get a sense of waves generated by these explosions propagating out to sea. There were, I don't know, hundreds of people probably down there that afternoon watching this occur from mostly a safe distance up the coast away from the interaction. This was taken about 6 p.m. by another HVO person. So here's the map of what happened, and I'm sorry if this is a little tricky to see. But this shaded line here shows that 26 acre lava delta that had formed from July to December from lava entering the sea. And this blue line here was the Park Service safety rope line, so folks were kept outside. The eventual collapse took a big bite out of the old sea cliff here, and that red arcuate area was what collapsed away sometime late on the evening of New Year's Eve, and you can see just a corner of the rope line got bitten away. It was very fortunate that there were no visitors here at the time, and I know park rangers that afternoon had, a couple of times at least, had to go get people to come back on this side of the rope line. So again, a very sobering reminder of what could have happened. And I believe at this time, the Park Service has reopened the area with a viewing area further to the east. Is that correct, Andrea?
That's correct.
That is correct, thank you. So they had it closed for a while until they reset the rope line and worked with some HVO folks to try to evaluate where a safe place should be. But it was of interest to us that such a big bite of the old sea cliff was taken away during this collapse. And we're still mulling over what really caused that. I think there's a probability that the pre-Pu'u'o sea cliff, which was back in about this direction, may have played a part. There's an old structural discontinuity here where the sea cliff was back in the early 90s. So this stuff may have just peeled away from that old discontinuity. It's also likely that there are rubble layers at the base of this part of the cliff that were progressively eroded by wave action during the last 6 months. So anyway, an interesting reminder that the process is not necessarily predictable, and we need to build in some conservative safety buffers. Here's a picture just taken yesterday also of that collapse bite through the old sea cliff. So the Park Service rope line just out of view of this picture heading over the cliff here. But you can see it's a big sequence of layers of lava flows with rubble in between. And here's the active delta reforming now a couple hundred meters away. This is Park Service employees reestablishing that rope line. And it's still a very beautiful place. From a telephoto lens, you can see the lava streaming into the ocean. And then, of course, after dark, the colors become very beautiful.
Do any of these delta collapses, do they pose any kind of risk for a localized tsunami?
They absolutely do. We don't have a lot of observational data for these in the past, but there is a video that I've seen of a small fishing boat that was almost swamped just offshore of a small collapse. But absolutely, there were waves observed during the New Year's Eve collapse series. I guess a good question is how big a tsunami is possible, and I'm not sure I can answer that. But yes,
Thank you.
one concern.
Tina, I have a
Oh, Tom,
comment
Tim.
as well. I just talked to one of the park guys tonight about that who was down there. He said that there were waves washing up onto the sea cliff itself when these chunks were falling in, and the water would then cascade back off as waterfalls back off the sea cliff. So big enough that it's reaching up onto the sea cliff where people could potentially be standing. So quite high.